Elliot Ness did not kill Frank Nitti. That rooftop scene in The Untouchables, where Kevin Costner grabs Nitti and throws him screaming off the courthouse, is completely made up. Every second of it. The real Frank Nitti was not even the kind of criminal the movie says he was. He was not a hitman in a white suit. He was the man who inherited Al Capone's entire empire and expanded it into Hollywood. But his real ending did not come from a lawman. It came from his own people, his own fear, and a set of railroad tracks in suburban Chicago. To understand just how wrong the movie got it, you need to see what it did to Nitti as a character. In The Untouchables, Billy Drago plays Nitti as a cold, slithering hitman in a white suit. He is tall and gaunt with a predatory stare that screams danger from across the room. He is the man who murders Sean Connery's character in his own apartment. He is the one carrying a gun inside the courthouse during Capone's trial. He taunts Ness, brags about the killings, and basically functions as the physical threat that Ness has to overcome in the final act. The real Frank Nitti looked nothing like that. Police records described him as a swarthy man who stood 5 feet 4 and 3/4 inches tall and weighed about 145 pounds. He had a small mustache and was known for being friendly with reporters and cameras. He wasn't a brooding loner in a white suit. He was a short, sharp-dressed operator who preferred boardrooms to back alleys. The movie treats him like Capone's personal attack dog, the visible enforcer, the guy who does the dirty work with his own hands while Capone sits behind a desk. And that version of Nitti makes for an incredible movie villain. David Mamet wrote a script that needed a final showdown between good and evil, and Nitti became that showdown. But in turning Nitti into an action movie antagonist, the film erased everything that made the real man interesting and everything that made his real ending so much darker. The real Nitti came from nothing. He was born Francesco Raffaele Nitto in 1886 in a small town called Angri in southern Italy. His father died before Nitto turned 3. His mother remarried, and the family eventually made their way to Brooklyn when Nitto was about 7 years old. He lasted until 7th grade, then dropped out. From there, it was a string of odd jobs, setting pins in a bowling alley, working factory floors, and eventually opening a barber shop that doubled as a front for fencing stolen jewelry. In Brooklyn, Nitti grew up in the same neighborhood as the Capone family. They weren't cousins, despite what later journalists claimed, but their families came from the same region of Italy and lived blocks apart. That connection would shape the rest of Nitti's life and ultimately destroy it, but we'll get there. What matters first is how Nitti climbed. By the time Prohibition began in 1919, he had already relocated to Chicago and built a reputation as a sharp operator. His talent was logistics, specifically smuggling Canadian whiskey across the border and distributing it through a network of Chicago speakeasies. That distribution network caught the attention of Johnny Torrio and his rising lieutenant Al Capone. Nitti started as Capone's bodyguard, but he moved up fast because he understood something the gunmen around him did not. He understood money. Nitti became the man in charge of all cash flowing through the Chicago outfit's operations. Forget muscle. Nitti was the finance brain behind a criminal empire that controlled liquor, gambling, prostitution, and labor rackets across the city. And this is where the movie version of Nitti really falls apart. The Untouchables wants you to think Nitti was a trigger man, someone who personally killed people and carried out hits in broad daylight. In reality, Nitti rarely took part in violence himself. He had bodyguards constantly at his side and was known for delegating the dirty work to others. His power came from organization, not intimidation. He ran the outfit like a business, and that business approach is exactly what made him Capone's most valuable asset. In 1931, both Capone and Nitti were convicted of tax evasion. Capone got 11 years in federal prison. Nitti received only 18 months. That gap tells you something important. Nitti was careful. He kept a lower profile than his boss and understood how to minimize his legal exposure. But those 18 months in a federal cell did something to Nitti that nobody expected, something that would matter far more than the conviction itself. When Nitti was released from prison in 1932, the media immediately labeled him the new boss of the Chicago outfit. And on the surface, that appeared to be true. He took over Capone's seat and ran the organization's day-to-day operations from his office on North LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago. But the real power structure of the outfit was more complicated than any newspaper headline suggested. Paul Ricca, a Sicilian-born gangster often called the Waiter because of a restaurant he once ran, had been quietly operating behind Nitti for years. Historians and crime researchers have described Ricca as the actual brains behind Capone and his successors. Nitti was the public face, and Ricca was the real decision maker. And the movie ignores all of that. The Untouchables presents organized crime as a simple hierarchy, Capone at the top and Nitti as his enforcer below. In my opinion, that is because the movie needed crime to feel personal and cinematic. Real life makes organized crime look colder, more layered, and more bureaucratic, which does not exactly work for a Hollywood climax. Shortly after taking the public reins of the outfit, Nitti survived an assassination attempt that tells you a lot about how dangerous his position really was. In December 1932, Chicago police detective Harry Lang raided Nitti's office and shot him 3 times in the back and neck. Lang then shot himself in the finger to make it look like self-defense. The whole thing was a sanctioned hit ordered by Chicago's own mayor, Anton Chermak, who wanted to replace Nitti with gangsters who were already on the city payroll. Nitti somehow survived, and at trial it came out that Lang had been paid $15,000 to kill him. Nitti was acquitted. Lang's career was destroyed. That attempted murder left a mark on Nitti that went beyond the physical scars. Combined with his 18 months in prison, which had been psychologically devastating for a man who suffered from severe claustrophobia, Nitti developed a deep and growing terror of confinement. That fear would define the last chapter of his life. Years later, it would put him on those tracks in North Riverside with a revolver in his hand. But first, Nitti was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Through the 1930s, Nitti steered the outfit away from the fading liquor trade and into labor unions and Hollywood. The scheme was ambitious. Outfit members placed their own people inside the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, a union that represented workers across the American film industry. Through a frontman named Willie Byoff, the outfit extorted millions of dollars from major Hollywood studios, including MGM, Paramount, and 20th Century Fox. The studios paid up because Byoff controlled the union workers who could shut down production overnight. It was the most lucrative racket the outfit had ever run, and it was all built on one man Nitti personally vouched for. That decision would destroy him. For years, the money flowed smoothly. But Willie Byoff had a problem. He talked too much, and eventually he got caught. When federal investigators started closing in, Byoff decided to cooperate. He gave up everything, names, dates, dollar amounts, and the entire structure of the extortion ring. In 1943, federal indictments came down against Nitti, Paul Ricca, and several other top outfit figures. They faced charges for extorting more than $2 million from the movie industry. The evidence was overwhelming, and the sentences would be severe. If you're the kind of person who digs into the real stories behind the movies, hit subscribe. I cover the Mafia, organized crime, and the history Hollywood gets wrong every single week. And this is where Nitti's story takes a turn that no movie ever gave him. A meeting was called at Nitti's home in the suburb of Riverside, Illinois. According to investigators who pieced together what happened, Ricca and the other outfit leaders confronted Nitti with an ultimatum. They blamed him for the entire Hollywood mess. Buyoff had been Nitti's pick, Nitti's man, and Nitti's responsibility. Rika demanded that Nitti plead guilty, take the prison sentence alone, and keep his mouth shut so the others could walk free. Some accounts go even further. Police investigators later revealed that Rika and the others wanted Nitti to kill Buyoff before the trial, even if it meant doing it in a crowded courtroom. Nitti was supposed to silence the witness and accept whatever came next, but Nitti couldn't do it, not because of conscience, but because of fear. The idea of going back to prison, of being locked inside a cell again, terrified him on a level that overrode everything else. He had been severely claustrophobic since his first prison stint, and the thought of years behind bars was something he could not face. He tried to convince Rika to find another way. He asked the others to share the burden. Rika refused and reportedly told Nitti to be a stand-up guy. On the morning of March 19, 1943, the day before Nitti was scheduled to appear in court, his wife Annette left for church. They had been married less than a year. After she left, Nitti loaded a .32 caliber revolver, left his home at 712 Selburne Road in Riverside, and started walking toward the Illinois Central Railroad tracks near Harlem Avenue and Kermack Road. The three trainmen, a conductor named William Seebauer and two switchmen named Barnett and Moran, were riding in the caboose of a freight train backing slowly through the area. They spotted a man staggering along the tracks as if he were drunk. They shouted a warning because he was nearly in the path of the train. Nitti stumbled off the tracks and walked toward a chain link fence. An autopsy later showed his blood alcohol level was 0.23, nearly 3 times what most states now consider legally impaired. He had been drinking heavily. The three trainmen watched as Nitti sat down against the fence, raised the revolver, and fired. The first 2 shots passed through the brim of his brown felt hat without hitting him. The third bullet entered behind his right ear and lodged in the top of his skull. When police arrived, they found Nitti slumped against the fence post with the gun still in his right hand. A coroner's jury ruled the next day that Nitti had taken his own life while temporarily insane and in a despondent frame of mind. He was 57 years old, and they buried him at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, just 200 feet from Al Capone's grave. His headstone bears the family name Naito and carries an inscription that reads, "There is no life except by death." There was controversy about burying a suicide victim in a Catholic cemetery, but the coroner's ruling of temporary insanity allowed it. If you are watching The Untouchables and you see Billy Drago fall off that courthouse rooftop, just remember, that scene is pure fiction. The real ending happened on a set of railroad tracks in North Riverside, Illinois, on a cold Friday morning in March 1943. Nobody threw him off anything. The weight of his own world was enough. The Untouchables gave audiences a hero who wins. Real life gave Frank Nitti a world where everybody loses. If you want to go deeper into the real power structure behind Capone's empire and the man who actually ran the Chicago outfit from the shadows, that video is on screen right now.